He sat in a concrete cell for 12 years. Not because he was a killer. Not because the evidence pointed to him. But because he made a choice, a single irreversible decision, to protect the one person he believed would never betray him. Her name was Emily Dawson. She said she was in trouble. She said it was an accident. She said he was the only one she could trust. So he stepped forward, took responsibility, and confessed to a murder he didn't commit. The police called it a closed case. The court handed down 25 years. And he walked into prison convinced he was doing the right thing. He never expected to get anything in return. But what he did not expect was silence. Letters that stopped coming. Promises that faded. And eventually news he would only hear through the whispers of another inmate. While he was counting years, she had married his best friend. The same man who stood beside him at the trial. The one who said he'd look after her. Their wedding photos were all over social media. She wore white. He wore the same smile Jordan remembered from high school, the one that could lie to your face without a tremble. Jordan Hale kept his thoughts to himself. He kept quiet through parole hearings. Kept his head down in the yard. And when the gate finally opened 12 years later, no one knew what was on his mind. He didn't make a scene. He didn't threaten anyone. He just walked out. And 2 months later, Dylan Reese was dead. Murdered in the same exact way as the man Jordan originally confessed to killing. Some say it was revenge. Others believe it was justice. But a few, the ones who really looked, began to wonder if Emily had lied from the beginning. She used them both. If she wasn't done yet. This is the story of loyalty, deception, and a murder that didn't end with one body. Fairfield, Missouri. A town that rarely made headlines. It sat quietly between stretches of farmland and river valleys, where people knew each other by name and trust was something passed down like property. Nothing about Fairfield stood out, until a single murder exposed everything the town thought it knew about love, loyalty, and the cost of silence. In 2008, 3 lives took center stage in a story no one saw coming. Jordan Hale was 22 at the time. Known for being dependable, soft-spoken, the kind of man who would rather shoulder blame than watch someone else suffer. He worked at the local hardware store. Played pickup basketball on Sundays. Never raised his voice. Never raised his hand. He had been with Emily Dawson since their senior year of high school. She was magnetic. Sharp, beautiful, the kind of woman people didn't just notice, they remembered. Emily had her own set of rules and she knew how to bend others to them. Some called her bold. Others called her reckless. Jordan called her everything. Dylan Reese had been Jordan's best friend since childhood. Athletic, social, always quick with a smile and quicker with a cover story. He had a charm that made people forget to ask the hard questions. He knew both Jordan and Emily better than anyone. He stood beside Jordan during the trial. Sat with Emily when she couldn't. Promised he'd keep an eye on her while Jordan was locked away. He kept that promise. In a way Jordan never expected. By the time Jordan stepped out of prison, the people he once trusted were no longer waiting for him. They were living together. Married. Happy if the photos were to be believed. That betrayal was just the beginning. Because within 6 months of Jordan's release, Dylan Reese was found dead, killed in the exact same manner as the man Jordan had confessed to murdering 12 years earlier. This case doesn't end where most begin. It starts with a confession and spirals into something far more personal. As the truth begins to surface, it raises a question more terrifying than guilt itself. Would you go to prison for the one you love? And if you did, what would you do if they forgot you ever existed? Because for Jordan Hale, silence was loyalty. Until silence turned into rage. And once the truth was out, someone paid with blood. Before courtrooms, mugshots, and headlines, there was a small-town high school romance. Jordan Hale and Emily Dawson met when they were 17. He was quiet, serious, and more thoughtful than most boys his age. She was bold, unpredictable, and had a way of pulling people into her orbit. They started dating in their senior year. From the outside they looked like a mismatched pair, he, the grounded type, she, the kind who never stayed in one place mentally for too long. But Jordan didn't seem to mind. He followed her lead in everything. If she wanted to skip school, he skipped. If she wanted to lie, he lied. He never challenged her. Never asked questions. He didn't need much. Just her. Over time, their connection tightened, but not in a way that brought balance. Emily set the pace and Jordan kept up without question. That kind of loyalty might look romantic to some, but to others, it was a warning sign. Friends noticed the imbalance early. Jordan would do anything for Emily. Emily? She'd do whatever she needed to protect herself. By the time they were 22, the dynamic hadn't changed. Jordan was still working the same job at the hardware store. Emily had already bounced through 3 employers. She was last seen working for Brooks Auto, a local repair shop known for cutting corners. She was let go within 3 months. At the time, her explanation was simple. She was being harassed by her boss, a man named Raymond Brooks. She told Jordan that Raymond had been inappropriate with her, that she had to leave before things got worse. Jordan didn't press her for proof. He never did. Dylan Reese, Jordan's childhood friend, stayed close through all of this. The 3 of them had known each other since middle school. Dylan was the bridge between them, cracking jokes when things got tense, smoothing over awkward silences. But even he noticed Emily's influence. He'd once called her the storm Jordan built a house in. He said it with a smile but not without meaning it. There were nights when Jordan would come over with bruises on his pride, barely speaking. Dylan never asked where he'd been. He just handed him a beer, changed the subject, and sat quietly. Loyalty in this group was currency. And Jordan had already given all of his away. By the summer of 2008, the cracks in their triangle were beginning to show. Dylan was still around but less so. Emily had become unpredictable in her behavior, starting arguments for no reason and disappearing for hours without explanation. Jordan stayed anyway. Whatever was happening behind closed doors, he kept it to himself. Then, on the night of August 14, 2008, Fairfield changed forever. Raymond Brooks was found dead behind his shop just after 11:30 p.m. He had closed early that night, telling his one remaining employee that he had something to deal with. His body was discovered by a neighbor walking their dog, collapsed near the dumpster with blunt force trauma to the back of his head. The weapon was never found. Police arrived within 20 minutes. There were no surveillance cameras at the shop and no signs of forced entry. Brooks' wallet was missing. A small safe inside his office had been emptied. It had all the surface details of a robbery, messy, desperate, chaotic. By 6 a.m. the next morning, Jordan Hale was in custody. He had walked into the Fairfield Police Department on his own. No lawyer. No warning. He sat down in the interview room and told them he had killed Raymond Brooks. He claimed it was a robbery gone wrong. He said he needed the money. That Brooks caught him in the act and tried to stop him. That he panicked and struck him with a tire iron. Police began questioning the details almost immediately. Jordan's timeline didn't fully add up. He couldn't account for certain hours in the evening, and he hesitated on key facts about the layout of the shop. His story sounded practiced, but not lived. When they asked why he chose that specific shop, he said it was random. But everyone in Fairfield knew that wasn't true. Emily had worked there, and she hadn't left on good terms. Detectives noticed other problems. No stolen cash was recovered. Jordan didn't have the safe's contents. No fingerprints were found on the scene that matched his. And the blood on his clothes was minimal, inconsistent with the level of violence used. But the confession was enough. He never mentioned Emily. Never offered an alternate motive. He stuck to the story. When asked directly if anyone had helped him or knew about the plan, he shook his head. Repeatedly. At trial, his defense attorney struggled to explain the gaps in the state's case. The judge didn't seem convinced by the prosecution's evidence, but Jordan's own admission made the defense nearly impossible. He pled guilty to second-degree murder, under a deal that would make him eligible for parole in 12 years. When the sentence was read aloud in the courtroom, Jordan showed no emotion. Emily wasn't in attendance. Dylan was. He stood in the back, arms folded, jaw locked. Afterward, when reporters asked Dylan if he believed Jordan was guilty, he gave a simple answer: "I believe he thinks he is." Jordan was transferred to a medium-security facility 3 hours from Fairfield. No appeal was filed. No post-conviction motion was submitted. He didn't contest it. He never asked for a new trial. He served the time. What no one knew at the time was that justice had only been half delivered. The other half would come years later, in a way that would force Fairfield to look back at everything it thought it knew. The Missouri Correctional Center wasn't built for comfort. It was built for containment. Jordan Hale entered as inmate number 84219 in the winter of 2009. He was 23 years old. Thin. Quiet. No disciplinary record. No prior charges. He didn't stand out, which is what made him stand out. The early months were difficult. He wasn't used to the noise, the codes, the structure. In the first 3 weeks he was placed in medical twice. Once for a busted lip, once for a cracked rib. He didn't report the names. Said he slipped. Guards noted he didn't talk much. He was assigned to janitorial duties. Scrubbing floors and emptying bins became routine. The only things he held onto were a few old letters from Emily and a dog-eared paperback she'd sent with his name written inside. Her first letter arrived 3 weeks after sentencing. It was short but affectionate. "We'll get through this," she'd written. "You're doing the right thing." The second one came a week later. She promised to visit. She did 4 times that year. Once every 3 months. In those early visits she smiled. She held his hand. Said she loved him. But she never looked him directly in the eye for long. She always kept the conversation moving. Never stayed longer than she had to. By year 2 the visits dropped to once every 6 months. Then once a year. Then nothing. She stopped writing too. Jordan kept sending letters but they came back unopened. He never asked the staff why. He didn't want the answer. Over time he withdrew further. He stopped joining rec sessions. Stopped signing up for classes. Refused counseling. His cellmate, a short-tempered man serving a sentence for armed robbery, said Jordan would spend hours staring at the wall or writing in a journal he never let anyone touch. No one on the outside checked in. His parents were gone. He had no siblings. Just one name on his visitor list and she had stopped coming. It wasn't anger he held onto in those years. It was something colder. A kind of quiet waiting. The belief that loyalty meant staying silent, even when it cost you everything. Back in Fairfield, the dynamic between Emily and Dylan changed quickly. Dylan had always been close to both of them. But when Jordan went away, he stepped into a role he had never been asked to play. He began visiting Emily more frequently. At first, it was small things, helping her with groceries, fixing a leaking pipe, walking her dog. To those nearby, it looked like friendship. By 2012, Dylan was staying overnight. No explanation was given and no one asked. Emily kept her curtains closed. Dylan stopped returning calls from mutual friends. People in town whispered, but without confirmation, they left it alone. Emily didn't speak about Jordan anymore. She'd tell the cashier at the grocery store that it was too painful. She told her coworkers she needed to move on. When pressed, Dylan said he was just being supportive. But there were signs of more. A neighbor once spotted them arguing late at night in the driveway. Dylan slammed a car door and walked away. Emily followed, grabbed his arm and dragged him back inside. By 2015 they were living together. No formal announcement was made. There was no engagement party, no posted photos, no family dinners. Dylan began answering the door at her house. He changed the name on the electric bill. Emily removed a framed photo of Jordan from the hallway and replaced it with a mirror. In public they acted like a couple. But behind closed doors things were tense. Dylan had moments where he pulled away, questioned their choices. But Emily always reeled him back in. She was good at that. Still, she never mentioned marriage. Not until 5 years had passed. Dylan's sister later told a reporter that he looked uncomfortable when the topic came up. But a date was set anyway. As for Jordan, he knew nothing. His last memory of Dylan was a handshake the day of sentencing. No visits. No letters. Not even a birthday card. In 2020, that changed, when someone inside the prison handed him an envelope. It was a Thursday afternoon when the envelope arrived. It wasn't from Emily or Dylan. It came from the girlfriend of another inmate. Her name wasn't important, but what she'd sent was. Inside was a folded printout. A screenshot from Facebook. The photo showed Emily in a white dress, standing in front of a courthouse. Next to her, in a suit 2 sizes too tight, stood Dylan Reese. Her hands rested on his chest. His arm wrapped around her waist. The caption read, "Forever with you." Jordan didn't speak for 2 full days. His cellmate later said he didn't eat, didn't sleep. Just stared at the photo for hours without blinking. When asked by a guard if everything was all right, Jordan nodded. He folded the paper carefully, tucked it into the back of his book and said nothing. He didn't talk about the photo with anyone. But his behavior changed. He started keeping to himself even more. He stopped attending church services. He declined parole prep programs. He didn't ask for legal reviews. It was as if the news had carved something out of him, and what remained was a version of himself that no one recognized. Some believed he was devastated. Others said he had always known this was coming. But none of that mattered. The choice was hers. She had moved on. So had Dylan. The question no one asked, what would Jordan do if he ever got out? In April 2021, Jordan Hale walked out of Missouri Correctional Center. He had served 12 years, meeting the minimum requirement for parole. There were no family members waiting. No cameras. Just a plain duffel bag and a man who looked 10 years older than he was. He spoke only once to the parole board during his final hearing. When asked if he had anything to say, he replied, "Nothing I say changes what happened." They granted release without protest. Jordan moved into a halfway house just outside Fairfield. Within a month he found work at a metal salvage yard, minimum wage, cash in hand, long hours. He didn't reconnect with old friends. Didn't answer messages from former classmates. He kept his head down and his routine fixed. But he didn't stay away from Fairfield. Every Sunday he'd take the long bus ride into town. Sometimes he'd walk by the courthouse. Other times by the park where he and Emily once sat under a broken swing set, talking about the future. But most of all he visited the street where Dylan and Emily now lived. He never spoke to them. Never approached. Just watched from a distance, quiet, still, expressionless. Neighbors noticed. A man in a gray jacket, always on the sidewalk, sometimes across the street, never saying a word. Some thought he was lost. One neighbor tried to offer him directions. Jordan thanked her, turned around and walked the other way. In Fairfield everyone knew who he was. They just didn't know what he was waiting for. Whatever it was, it didn't take long. The trailer Jordan moved into sat near the edge of town, just off an access road rarely traveled unless you lived nearby. It was small, 2 rooms, rusted siding, and unreliable heater. The landlord didn't ask questions. Rent was paid in cash. He worked at a scrap yard on the outskirts. It was the only job that didn't care about his record. His shift started before sunrise and ended when the sun dropped. His tasks were routine: lifting, sorting, cutting, loading. He kept to himself. Ate lunch alone. Didn't speak unless spoken to. Those who worked beside him said he never smiled, but he never caused problems either. What they didn't know was that Jordan's real focus had nothing to do with bolts or wire. Each night, once back at the trailer, he would write. Pages at a time. In notebooks lined up along the windowsill. Some filled with names. Others with drawings. Most with records, days, dates, addresses, patterns. It started as an exercise in memory. Then it became something else. He began following Emily and Dylan, not up close, not enough to be noticed. Always from a distance. He watched their routines. What time they left the house. Where they went. When they came back. If they argued. If they didn't. He took notes. Recorded audio on a handheld device he kept in his coat. Used binoculars from a hardware store discount bin to check for changes in their home's layout. New curtains, new furniture, who visited and how often. The more he watched, the more he convinced himself of what he believed to be true. That Emily had never been a victim. That she wasn't just someone who'd moved on. That she had always been the one responsible for what happened to Raymond Brooks. And now Dylan had become her next project. Jordan began reviewing newspaper clippings, old case records, social media posts, even public business filings. Anything that might hint at Emily's connections to Raymond, before, during, or after the murder. He logged inconsistencies, flagged dates that didn't match, conversations that contradicted her previous statements. One night, after nearly a year of collecting, he stood in front of his mirror, holding a voice recorder, and said, "She let me go to prison. She let him sleep in my house. What she won't do, what she can't do, is walk away from this clean." It was early September when Jordan called Dylan. The number was still saved from before. Dylan didn't answer at first. Jordan left a message, calm, measured, brief. "I've been thinking a lot. I'd like to talk. No trouble. Just talk." The next day Dylan returned the call. He sounded cautious but curious. Jordan suggested they meet somewhere private. Out near the old water treatment facility just past Route 9. It was a place they used to visit as kids. Dylan agreed. They met 2 nights later. Jordan brought coffee in a thermos. Dylan showed up with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking nervous. The conversation lasted just over 40 minutes. Jordan recorded it using a small audio device pinned inside his coat. At first they talked like old friends, mutual memories, old jokes, quiet nods to the past. But the tone shifted quickly. Jordan asked Dylan if he remembered what Emily had said about Raymond Brooks back in 2008. Dylan hesitated. Jordan asked if he ever believed her version of the story. Dylan changed the subject. Jordan pressed again, this time about the months after his arrest. About the first time Dylan stayed overnight. About the first time he and Emily crossed a line. Dylan admitted they'd become close. He said it started slowly. That they hadn't planned anything. That they'd both been lost. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He just asked, "Do you think she loved either of us?" Dylan didn't answer. Jordan left the meeting with the audio in his pocket and his thoughts locked in. The next day he called Emily. She picked up but barely let him speak. He asked to meet in person. She refused. He told her he had questions. About Raymond, about Dylan, about the letters that stopped. She told him he was living in the past. That she'd moved on. That he should do the same. Before she hung up, he asked her one last thing. "Did you ever think about telling the truth?" Her response was cold. There is no truth left to tell. The call ended. Jordan stared at the phone in silence for a long time. Then he turned on the recorder and hit play, listening again to every word Dylan had said. Dylan Reese was found dead on a Tuesday morning. His neighbor noticed the front door wide open just after 8 a.m. The police report would later state that Dylan had been killed sometime between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. The cause of death: blunt force trauma. The weapon, a metal tool, possibly a jack handle, was found beside the body. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables taken. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Just the same violent method used in the murder of Raymond Brooks 12 years prior. Emily told officers she'd been staying with her sister that night. She said she hadn't spoken to Dylan in over 24 hours. When asked if she knew anyone who would want to hurt him, she said no. Jordan was brought in for questioning within 2 days. He didn't deny knowing Dylan. He didn't deny meeting him a week earlier. But he claimed he hadn't spoken to him since. When asked where he was the night Dylan died, he said he was home, alone. When investigators asked if he'd ever been angry enough to hurt Dylan, he said, "I served time for someone else's mistake. I'm not doing it again." That phrase would be repeated across headlines for weeks. Inside Jordan's trailer, police found several notebooks, the audio recorder, and documents linking Emily to past employment records at Brooks Auto, files Jordan had collected. They also found handwritten notes suggesting he believed both murders were connected, and that Emily was central to both. He was arrested on suspicion of second-degree murder. At his arraignment, his public defender asked if Jordan would be pleading guilty. Jordan declined. "I confessed once," he said. "Never again." Emily did not attend the hearing. The town of Fairfield reacted in quiet shock. Some believed Jordan had finally snapped. Others believed he had just completed a sentence he should never have served in the first place. Still others suspected that the full truth had yet to surface. Emily was never charged. No direct link tied her to either crime. But the court of public opinion wasn't satisfied with silence. 2 months after Dylan's death, a podcast covering the case released its first episode. By the end of the year, national media had picked up the story. Jordan's notebooks were cited. The audio file between him and Dylan was played in clips. What remained was the same question Jordan had asked in that recording. "What do you think she's capable of?" No one could answer with certainty. Fairfield wasn't used to attention. But it found itself under a microscope again, 15 years after the first murder, and now in the wake of a second. This time, opinions were harder to manage. There were those who stood firmly behind Jordan Hale. They remembered the trial in 2009. They remembered the lack of physical evidence, the doubts that were never voiced in court, and the way Emily seemed to vanish from his life as soon as the sentence was signed. To them, Jordan was a man who had been used, discarded, and forgotten, until he couldn't take it anymore. Others saw it differently. They pointed to the notebooks, the recordings, the photographs of Emily in Dylan's home, the notes scribbled across every page of Jordan's journal. They questioned his silence after prison, the time he spent watching, the years he held back whatever thoughts built inside him. To them, he wasn't a man who'd lost everything. He was someone who planned. Lines were drawn quickly. In restaurants, one table spoke of Emily as the real threat. The next said she'd been dragged into something beyond her control. On local forums, anonymous users argued over evidence, motive, timelines, and character. One side called it a tragedy. The other called it premeditation. There was no middle ground left. A local pastor tried to bring the town together. He gave a sermon about forgiveness. Only half the regulars showed up that Sunday. Fairfield had changed. But no one could agree on how. The second trial of Jordan Hale began on a cold morning in February. This time, the prosecution had more than a confession. They had his journals. The surveillance-style notes. The meeting with Dylan. The voice recording. They had a trail of behavior that suggested purpose. What they didn't have was clear proof he had been inside the house the night of Dylan's death. The defense argued just that. They pointed out the missing murder weapon, the absence of Jordan's fingerprints, the lack of any eyewitness testimony. They questioned why Emily hadn't been investigated further, why her prior relationship with Raymond Brooks hadn't led to more scrutiny the first time. But the weight of Jordan's own words made it difficult to shift the narrative. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years. No eligibility for parole. Jordan showed no emotion as the sentence was read. His public defender said he expected that. Jordan had spent more than a decade keeping his feelings to himself. No one expected tears now. Emily was never called to testify. She had moved out of Fairfield 2 months earlier. Her address was sealed. No charges were filed against her in connection to either case. Still, her name did not fade quietly. Within weeks, online forums lit up with new theories. Social media sleuths began dissecting everything, from her interviews in local media to old Facebook posts archived by classmates. They cross-referenced dates, images, and timelines, drawing connections that might have otherwise been dismissed. A true crime podcast dedicated a 6-part season to the case. The final episode was titled, "The One Who Walked Away." Soon after, a film crew from Denver arrived in town to shoot a limited series. The courthouse gave them access to records. Residents were asked for interviews. Some declined. Others said it was time the story reached beyond state lines. For the first time since the original arrest, Fairfield became a place people Googled. Some questions still echo through the town, and far beyond it. Was Emily Dawson ever honest with anyone? Did she tell Jordan the full truth on that night in 2008, or only enough to make him act? Was Dylan her backup plan, or had he always been the one she wanted? Did Jordan kill Raymond Brooks to protect her, or had someone else done it, leaving him to take the blame? There were no fingerprints. No video footage. Just words. And in both murders, words were all it took to close the case. There is one theory that appears more often than others. It suggests that Emily played both men against each other from the start. That she created the conditions for violence. That neither of them acted without her influence. But there's another version of events. One that points not to manipulation but opportunity. That Dylan, not Jordan, had reason to silence Raymond Brooks. That he was involved in something far more complex than a relationship. That Emily didn't need to push anyone, because Dylan already had his own reasons to remove a man from the picture. With Raymond gone and Jordan in prison, Dylan had Emily. And Emily had freedom. If that version holds truth, it would mean Jordan paid the price for something Dylan had done. And later, when Dylan was no longer useful, the cycle repeated itself. The official story ends with one man in a cell, one man in the ground, and one woman nowhere to be found. The real story? That depends on who you ask. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes truth isn't lost. It's just buried under everything people want to believe. Though Emily Dawson was never officially charged in connection to either murder, her name continued to surface in conversations that questioned the foundation of both cases. In 2008, Raymond Brooks was found dead behind his shop with no clear motive from Jordan Hale, who had never interacted with the man outside of his connection to Emily. But an overlooked part of the case file, a payroll dispute, was later mentioned in the notes found inside Jordan's trailer. According to those notes, Emily had accused Brooks of withholding wages. She had also allegedly claimed he made inappropriate remarks on more than one occasion. But no formal complaints had been filed. There was no HR process in place at Brooks Auto. Just word against word. One former coworker came forward in 2022 to share an email thread she had saved from years earlier. In those emails, Emily appeared to pressure Brooks for additional payments, referencing a favor she said he owed her. The tone wasn't casual. It suggested leverage, though what that leverage was remains unclear. Some who reviewed those messages said it looked like an attempt to force payment. Others believed it hinted at a private agreement gone wrong. What remains uncontested is that shortly after those emails, Emily was fired. And 2 weeks later, Raymond Brooks was dead. Dylan Reese was rarely mentioned in connection to the first murder. He wasn't called as a witness. He wasn't part of any legal filings. Yet, in a recent documentary series produced after Jordan's second conviction, an investigative team uncovered personal emails exchanged between Dylan and Emily during the time Jordan was being questioned. One message, dated 3 days before Jordan's confession, includes a line from Dylan that reads, "This won't come back to us if he does what you said." Another message mentions the name Raymond, followed by a phrase that suggests Emily had previously made threats, though the context remains ambiguous. Digital forensics experts confirmed the messages came from Dylan's account. The recipient's email had been deleted, but the senders remained archived in a backup server. When this information was made public, it reignited speculation that Dylan knew far more than he had ever revealed. The idea that he helped Emily cover something up, or encouraged Jordan's confession, was no longer seen as a fringe theory. Still, no charges were filed. Prosecutors stated that the emails lacked the clarity and intent needed for criminal action. The case had already been closed. But the question stayed open. During Jordan Hale's first arrest, he provided a timeline for the night of the murder. That timeline had gaps, but no one challenged them in court, largely because he confessed. The assumption was that the inconsistencies were due to stress or trauma. However, years later, Jordan's own notes suggested that Dylan had been unaccounted for during a crucial 2-hour window on the same night Brooks was killed. Cell tower pings from that evening, obtained through a records request, placed Dylan's phone far from home. When asked where he had been, Dylan told police he was with a friend. That friend, however, was never formally interviewed. The exact nature of Dylan's movements during that window remains unclear. While this alone doesn't prove involvement, it has led many to revisit the timeline with fresh eyes. Some now believe that Jordan's confession was an effort to shield both Emily and Dylan, unaware of the depth of their connection. Others believe he had been misled, fed a version of events that was already missing key pieces. Throughout both investigations, Emily presented herself as composed and emotionally detached. She declined interviews. She refused to participate in documentaries. She didn't respond to emails from journalists, nor did she give any statements during either trial. While none of this is criminal, it did fuel the idea that she had something to protect. Classmates and former colleagues have since described her as strategic in the way she managed relationships. One teacher said she was smart enough to stay 2 steps ahead of everyone, but never loud about it. A former manager said Emily was polite to the point of distance, always calculating the room. Her involvement with Dylan raised further concerns. The quick progression from emotional support to domestic partnership left many wondering whether she had always seen him as a backup plan, or whether their closeness existed long before Jordan's arrest. What some find most striking is how little emotion she displayed after Dylan's death. Neighbors noted that she cleared out of their shared home within a week. No memorial. No obituary. No public acknowledgement. After Dylan Reese's murder, Emily left Fairfield. Her current location is unknown, but she's believed to be living under a different name. One source, unverified but close to the original investigation, claimed she was seen in Texas, working under a new employer using her mother's maiden name. 2 months after her departure, a man named Eric Foster was mentioned in a private Facebook group focused on tracking the case. He had recently moved to Texas and was seen in photographs with a woman who resembled Emily. The group dug into his background and found that he had previously worked as a paralegal. None of this is confirmed. Emily has made no public statements. She's not legally required to. But the idea that she has entered a new relationship has only deepened the mystery for those who followed the case. Some see it as evidence of a pattern. Others believe she's just trying to escape the weight of 2 violent events that happened around her. What's certain is that she hasn't looked back. He gave up 12 years for love. In return, he lost everything, and may lose his life behind bars once again. Jordan Hale walked into a police station in 2008 because someone he trusted asked him to. He walked out in 2021 to find that everything he believed in, every bond, every promise, every ounce of loyalty, had already been buried under silence and distance. He sat in a courtroom again, listening to another sentence, this time carrying more weight than the first. The world had changed outside, but inside nothing had. His name was still the one on the record. His future, still decided by people who didn't know the full story. And what about Emily? She never answered a single question in public. Not about Raymond Brooks. Not about Dylan Reese. Not about the choices she made after Jordan's arrest. The one person who stood at the center of both stories disappeared without accountability, without confrontation, without closure. She moved on. Jordan didn't. His notebooks told us that much. His audio recording said even more. But none of it was enough to stop what followed. One man dead. One in prison. And one who was never charged. Which leads us here, to the part no court ruling can settle. Was Jordan a victim, or just another pawn in Emily's game? Did he act out of grief? Out of betrayal? Or had he simply reached the end of a long, silent countdown? What would you have done in his shoes? Would you have confessed? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have taken back your life no matter the cost? Comment below and tell us where you stand. Who do you believe? What do you think really happened in Fairfield, Missouri? If you followed this story to the end, you know how complicated the truth can become when trust is used as a weapon. This case isn't just about what was proven in court, it's about what was never fully explained. It's about silence. It's about the quiet space between love and control. And it's about what happens when the people closest to you are also the ones capable of walking away without looking back. If you found this case as disturbing as we did, subscribe now for more untold stories that raise questions law can't always answer. From buried motives to vanished witnesses, from quiet neighborhoods to unexplained deaths, we cover the kind of cases that don't just leave scars. They leave echoes. In our next episode, we look at a family disappearance in East Texas that still haunts a single street 15 years later, and why one survivor believes the wrong person is sitting in prison for it. Until then, stay curious, stay sharp, and remember, not every closed case is finished.